Philip and I are thrilled to be expecting our 6th grandchild, and today I start the baby quilt for my newest granddaughter. Hey friends, it's Barbara Sue at Kowalski Mountain, and welcome back to the homestead. Yes, Philip and I are expecting a new granddaughter. Her name is Rosemary, and she is expected in April. In typical fashion, I have waited much too long to start my baby quilt, and this one I think I'm pushing the limit even further than I ever have before. Now the baby shower is the 1st of March, and I have to get this done before the shower. So it's crunch time, and it's time to get this started. Now the last baby quilt I made was for our grandson Hunter, and I did an entire series about designing his quilt all the way through the entire process, and you can see that right up here. Now for Hunter's baby quilt and the other baby quilts I've designed, I have designed my own quilts using a book called Around the Block, and Hunter's quilt I designed from the book Once More Around the Block, because at that time I couldn't get into my storage unit to try to find my pattern book. My daughter Faith is very much a planner, and she actually helped me out a little bit with this quilt in that she had a theme in mind of what she wanted for her baby quilt. And Rosemary's theme is wildflowers. And so this quilt, I wanted to have a flower block in it to represent the wildflowers. Now I went through the Once More Around the Block book, and I couldn't really find anything that even symbolized a flower. And so I spent about a half a day in my storage unit digging through boxes trying to find my original book Around the Block, and I couldn't find it. I did find my quilting books, but I did not find that book. I'm beginning to wonder if I loaned it out because I never would have gotten rid of it. Now, while I was in the storage unit, I actually found this book called P.S. I Love You. It's a baby collection. And this book I actually bought over 25 years ago when my niece was born. I made something out of this book for my niece. And I just kind of thumbed through it, and I found something I really liked. Now this quilt on page 27 is called Garden Song, and the block is very much a flower. Now I don't usually do scrappy type quilts. I'm very type A, very matchy kind of person, but I really liked this flower block. Now I really had to think about whether or not I wanted to do this quilt. The reason that I've made all of my quilts from the Around the Block books is this is a rotary cutting quilt guide. Now a rotary cutter is a blade on a wheel. And this makes for really fast cutting. And while I've made quilts in different ways, I prefer cutting with a rotary cutter because it's so much faster. Now this book uses what's called templates. And a template is a pattern that you trace and you cut out. Now we can cut this out with a rotary cutter. It's not going to be near as fast, and that is what we're going to do, but it's not going to be near as fast. It's a lot more of a cumbersome process. And so I had to really think about if I wanted to do the template quilt, because I've already waited to the last minute. Now the petals of the flowers has the most pieces to cut out, and I need 48 of those petals cut around using the template. Now I have some tricks, and we are going to cut it with a rotary cutter, so it's going to go faster, but it's not near as fast as using my Around the Block book. But I couldn't find anything I really liked otherwise, and so we're going to take the plunge and do the template quilt. Now of all the baby quilts I've ever made, Well, other than my niece. I think I made a quilt for my niece out of this book. I've always designed my own quilts. Now, the nice thing about quilting is that even though I'm making a pattern from a book, my quilt will not be like anyone else's quilt. Yes, there will be other quilts made for babies called the Garden Song. Yes, most definitely. But none of them are going to have my colors or my flair, and I have a few things up my sleeve to make it unique. Now, I already told you in my type A matchy-matchy personality, I don't do scrappy quilts well. Normally, you would make this quilt completely from your scrap bag using just random colors for the petals so that no flower would be the same. Now, mine isn't going to be like that. Mine are going to have the same colors because, believe it or not, I don't have a big scrap collection. I always buy the fabric I need for my quilt, and I try to get that as close as I can, and I try to not have a lot of extra. I have a very tiny scrap collection of only about 2 Rubbermaid boxes. So these are the colors that I've picked out for the flower petals for my granddaughter's quilt. So I've got yellow, purple, pink, and blue for the flower petals. One of the things I have up my sleeve to make this quilt unique is I'm going to use a little bit of this fabric. Now, this fabric is from my scrap collection, and this is actually the fabric that I used in my daughter's quilts. When I made my daughter's quilts, they shared a bedroom, and so I wanted their quilts to be similar so that they would match, but not the same. And so they both have this fabric in it, and then one had a pink based quilt and the other one had a green based quilt, and so they coordinated, but they're completely different. There's not a single block in them that's exactly the same. I made them as unique as I could using the same color palette. I don't have a lot of this fabric left, but I have just a little, and I'm going to put a few petals in my granddaughter's quilt that is the same as her mother's quilt. Now, this is a garden themed quilt, and so it does have a gardeny feel to it. I was able to find this vine fabric to do the border, which I think is going to give it a nice little garden feel, and I'm always a huge fan of a white on white print. Now, my granddaughter's name is Rose Marie, and I never even thought to choose a rose fabric. I was so focused on the wildflower aspect of her quilt that I didn't even think about her name being Rose. Now, this fabric is a little rose-like, as is this fabric from my daughter's quilt. So we're going to call those roses in celebration of Rosemary. Now, in preparing to make your first quilt, you always want to wash and dry your fabrics, and I actually went to the laundromat to do that. Now, we do have a washing machine here on the homestead, but I do not have a dryer that is hooked up. I have one, but I don't have it here. And so I couldn't dry my fabrics. Now, I wanted to machine dry these fabrics because I wanted to pre-shrink the 100% cotton fabrics, because it would be disastrous if my daughter washed this and dried it later, which she will do, and it shrunk later. So I've already pre-shrunk all of my fabrics, and I have also already done all of the ironing. Now, ironing is never a fun part of quilting, but it is a very important part of doing so. So never skip your ironing. Now let's go ahead and start this template quilt. Now, the really nice thing about using a pattern book is that some of my guesswork and calculations were done for me. The quilt can be made in 3 different sizes according to the book, and of course you could always multiply it however you wanted, but it comes in cradle, crib, and twin sizes, and it tells you exactly how much fabric that you'll need. It tells you the finished size, the number of blocks, and it takes a lot of the calculation out, which is kind of speeding up my process. Now, I am making the cradle size quilt. That was the closest size to the other quilts I've made for my other grandchildren. Now, down here in the cutting section, it tells me exactly what templates I need. Now, some of these templates, I'm definitely going to have to use a template. For like the muslin center, I will have to use a template. The diamonds, I will use a template. The petals, I'm going to use a template. One more is the green corners of blocks. That one I put as a question mark of needing a template. I will measure the template, and if it's a even measurement, something that's easily cut with the rotary cutter, I'm going to do that in strips and cut it that way. If it's kind of an off measurement, I may have to do a template. So at minimum, I'm going to need 3 templates to make this quilt. Now, you can make a template out of anything. You could make it out of cardboard. You could just cut it out of freezer paper. Freezer paper is kind of cool to use because you can iron it onto the fabric and it'll actually stick to it. And then you can just cut around it. But I want to rotary cut this, so I want this to go faster. And I also want my templates to have sharp edges that I can use that rotary cutter. And so I am using template plastic. Now this was in Joann's in the quilting section. Template plastic comes in 2 different weights. This is the heavier weight because I wanted nice sharp templates so that I could use my rotary cutter. Now in this book, all of the pieces are in the back of the book and they're all labeled. So the first one we're going to start with is going to be K. This is the petal of the flower, and I'm going to make that template first. Now it's pretty simple. Using my template plastic, I'm just going to lay this over the top and I'm going to trace it. Now you always want to cut your templates with your seam allowance, and this book actually has the seam allowance built into it. Now this one, this eye piece, it tells you add the seam allowance. And you can see there's no dotted line around that. So this dotted line is the sewing line and the outside line is the seam allowance. And in quilting, you always use 1/4 inch seams. So here's my template plastic. And I'm going to use a ruler. I hate using this ruler. I don't want to use my ruler because sometimes you get ink on it, and I don't want ink on my fabric ruler. I'm just going to use this straight edge here. You can see how I'm getting ink on that. Now I'm being really careful not to move the plastic while I'm doing my tracing, and this is going to be the booger. And I'm going to label my template. So I know exactly which piece it is. Now my M piece, let's see. That's right. Man, it's just under 4. Now my M piece is a triangle, and triangles are easily cut from squares. You cut a square, you cut it in half. I think I can do this without a template. I can do that by doing a 4-inch square. It's right there, like maybe even 3 7/8. I will measure it really good to get that number, but I think we're going to be able to do it without doing a template. Now the hardest piece to cut is going to be all of these petals because there's so many of them. The circles are going to be difficult as well, but there's not nearly as many. There's only 6. Now you'll notice these are not my sewing scissors, because if you are a seamstress or you are the child of a seamstress or even the spouse of a seamstress, you should know you never use your fabric scissors for cutting anything but fabric. Now I'm really taking my time to cut these templates carefully. My mother is a seamstress and my father is a carpenter. And I grew up with the motto, measure twice, cut once. So carefully cutting now is going to make things a lot easier later. Now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to check my template. Perfect. Now I could definitely see in some of the tracing, you know, how you angle the pen different ways. You could definitely see how that was affecting where you cut it. That's why I wanted to do a double check to make sure it matches, and it definitely does. This is going to be one of the harder pieces. Now this piece is appliqued onto the quilt, which we're going to get into what that means later. I'm not going to worry too much about how close this is, because this is going to end up really being hand sewn onto the quilt, and I can do some fine tuning when I do that. So I'm not going to get too crazy about that one, but I think we're ready to start cutting. Yay! All right, let me clean this up and get out some supplies, and we're going to get going. Now I'm going to go ahead and start with one of the hardest pieces to cut out, and that's going to be the petal. Now the cradle size quilt needs 48 petals, and every flower has 8 petals. So I chose 8 different fabrics, so I need 6 from each. Now in my specialty fabric from Faith's quilt, I won't have enough to do that. So I'm hoping for at least 3 out of this. So 3 of the blocks will be just a little bit different and have this specialty fabric in them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I always want to make sure to be using my template exactly the same way. I'm going to fold my fabric in such a way that I can get 6 with a single cut. Now I don't know if you can see that here, but this is the edge of the fabric. I don't want that in any of my pieces because it's kind of a different weave. And so I want to fold it so that that's out of my piece. Now I'm going to put a little piece of tape on the back of my template so it won't move, because moving is really important. We don't want that to happen. Now I have this small ruler. Oh, I forgot to talk to you about that. Let me rewind here a little bit. So some of the things we're going to need for this part of the quilting project, and that's cutting with the rotary cutter, is we need a self-healing mat. Now I have these mats in a couple of different sizes. This is my big mat, covers almost my whole table, which makes it really convenient for cutting. Now you also need rulers, and rulers come, these are thick plastic, and they come in all different shapes and sizes, small ones, big ones. I have another one, but I can't find it. Maybe it's with that book that I can't find. But these you use to mark your edges. And then of course we have our rotary cutter. Now my number one rule about a rotary cutter is that once you're done with it, you always close the blade. Now I started quilting when my kids were little. Faith was actually a baby when I started quilting. And so when you have babies around, you want to always make sure this is closed. Now, I don't have any babies around anymore, but it's still a really good habit because a rotary cutting blade is very sharp. Now, the only edge I'm worried about is this little one. I'm not sure we can cut that with the rotary cutter. I might have to scissor cut that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my ruler perfectly with my template. And I remember my measure twice, cut once theme. I double check it and then I cut. Now that cut all 6 layers at the same time. Now I'm going to pick up my ruler and I'm going to do the same thing on moving your fabrics is never a good idea, let me just tell you that. But I just did. That looks a little off. I think it's going to be okay. So now I'm going to line this one up, use my rotary cutter, and cut. I kind of wish I'd used the smaller mat because I could turn the whole mat. Now I'm pushing really hard on my cutter because I want to get through all 6 layers with a single cut. Yeah. Well, that wasn't perfect, but I kind of nicked my template, but that's okay. But there are my first 6 pieces. Now, when we get to another piece that is completely rotary cut, you're going to see how much faster that is than this. But that actually went better than I expected. I do have a sharpener for my rotary cutter. So this works by, let's see, you unscrew the blade, carefully take it out, and you put it on this little piece. And then it's like this. And then I have this. And this protects your fingers. It's like sandpaper is what it's like. And then this side is like a finer grain to kind of buff it up. You know, I may not have big children at home anymore to interrupt, but fur babies interrupt just as much. Look at that. Amazing how that works. Okay, so now we are to the specialty fabric from my daughter's quilt. It's never a good idea to move the fabric like I'm doing. That's actually poor practice because your lines might not stay together. So that's why it's not a good idea, but it's not easy to do it any other way. I hear you, Roxy. Here they are. So here's all the petals, and that was, the templates make this a lot easier to cut out something like this, and using the rotary cutter and the ruler as a guide makes it go a little bit faster. So that wasn't too painful. Now another challenging part of this quilt are the diamonds. And the reason the diamonds are so challenging is because this is going to cut across the grain. Now, fabric that's cut across the grain can stretch as you sew it. So it can be finicky to work with because you don't want to stretch it while you're sewing, because once you let go, it's going to pucker. Now, to make this just a little bit easier to work with, I'm going to cut this fabric into strips. And that's really just for me, so I can deal with a small piece of fabric and not a yard. So using my rotary cutting mat, I lined the fabric up on a line, I've lined my ruler up on a line, and then I'm just going to cut a strip. So now I can work with this piece of fabric and not all of this. Now I did 4 layers of fabric, and I need 48 diamonds. So that means 4 times 48 is going to be 12. So I need to cut 12 of these out. Now I'm going to be really careful. You don't want to like cut one here and then cut over here and then cut over here, because all of those are going to make the fabric stretch. So we're just going to do this nice and straight. I didn't put tape on that. Got the tape. Shade with a little bit of my template. Now these are really hard for me to see. These are the white on white. And I want to make sure everything is correct. As I get older, vision changes, and so I have to be really careful to make sure, for one, I can see my colors correctly, and for two, that I can see the pattern on these lighter fabrics. Now the next piece that we're going to be cutting out is called Sashing, and Sashing is these white lines between the blocks. Now this pattern actually calls to use a template for that. It's template H, and 5 1/4 inch long template that you place on the fold. So that means we need 10 1/2 inches in length, and then it's 2 1/2 inches wide. So I'm not going to do a template for that. I'm going to cut 10 1/2 by 2 1/2 inch strips. Now when you're using a cutting mat and a cutting ruler, they both have lines on them. So I've lined my fabric up on the line. So this edge, which is a fold, so I know it's straight, is as lined up on that as perfectly as I can get. And the same on this side. It's lined up as perfectly as I can get it. Now I'm going to cut 10.5 inches. So these are 1-inch blocks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then using my ruler, I'm going to use the 1/2 inch line. And I'm going to place that on the next inch line. So that's automatically going to give me 1/2 inch. Now remember, measure twice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Whoops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I did it wrong. Haha, see, this is why we do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And a half. And we're going to line it up here, and we're going to line it here so we know it's perfect. Checking twice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and a half. Now I check my line, and I also, there's like a raised edge here. I push that right up against, I have a lip, and I push that right up against the cutting mat so I know it's perfectly straight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and a half. Everything's lined up. We're going to cut. And now I have a perfect 10.5 inch strip. Now we're going to take this and we're going to do the same thing. I want to make sure this is perfectly straight. And I'm going to use my ruler. And I'm just going to cut this off so I know I'm perfectly straight. And now I'm going to do 2.5 inches. So 1, 2, lining up my 1/2 inch line with my 1 inch line. So 1, 2.5. It matches up here. And I have perfect 10.5 by 2.5 strips. Now since I have a 1/2 inch right here, and I haven't moved anything, I'm just going to do 2. 1, 2, and I've got my 1/2. And there I go. There's my 10.5 inch strips. So we're going to line this up. We got our 2.5. Everything's perfect. So you can see how much faster it is to cut the rotary cut pieces versus the templates, which is why I really love that method. Now I'm going to admit I'm really worried about another aspect of this, and that's all the piecing, because those are not going to be straight seams either. Those are going to be fitted seams. There's going to be a lot of room for mistakes in this quilt. So I heard an old saying, and I should really ask my Amish neighbors. I feel dumb asking them, which is why I haven't, but I feel like I should, because I really want to know. But I was told that the Amish believe that a perfect quilt is unlucky, and they purposely make mistakes in their quilts so that they'll be lucky. Now, I never have to purposely make mistakes. I can do that all on my own with no purpose. Hey friends, I'm going to jump in here really quick to tell you that I did ask my Amish neighbor that very question, and she looked at me like I was kind of crazy. She had no idea what I was talking about. So I'm going to say that that is not a true statement. Now, she did tell me, I showed her pictures of my quilt, and she did say they don't make quilts fancy like that. They make very utilitarian quilts. I think that that may be them necessarily, not just the Amish, but I did enjoy my conversation with her and showing her my quilt. Okay, so I've got my sashing, I have my petals, and I have my diamonds. Okay, so what else do we got? Now my next piece is the setting square, and that's piece C. which is this one right here. That piece is 2.5 by 2.5. We're definitely going to rotary cut that one. Now we need 10 of those out of the white. We're going to cut a 2.5 inch strip. And I've got 4 layers there, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I probably, let's hope I can get it all out of that. So we're going to line this up. And we're going to cut 2.5. So we got 4. 8. And we have 12. All right, so these are our sashing squares, and we also need some in green. So let's see. Okay, so we've got our diamonds, our sashing strips, our setting squares. We have our petals. And now we need to do our corners of our blocks and our setting squares. Now I have not ironed the green fabric yet, because there's so much. So I'm going to go ahead and iron some of this, and I'm going to cut these pieces. I'm not going to iron all of this. I think I bought too much of this fabric. Actually, I'm pretty positive I did, but it's okay. That's all right. It's green. I'll use it in other things. Maybe. Now our next piece is the M piece, and triangles like this are easy because you can cut a square and then you cut it in half. And this, I think we can also do strip quilting. So I'm just going to measure this square. And it's right at, it's just a hair over 3 1/4. And that's square. So I'm going to cut that. I've got all kinds of edges here, so I need to make this nice and straight. Now the other reason I think this is so much fabric is I don't think this is standard width of fabric. Standard fabric is like 40 some inches wide, 42, 45 inches wide. This fabric was a quilt backing fabric, and I bet you it's wider. I didn't measure it, but I think it's wider. I think it's a lot wider. So I could have gotten away with a lot less fabric. Okay, so now we have a nice straight line. So now I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and that's going to be, wait a minute. Yes, that's right. Before I cut that, let's check it before I cut it. Yeah, that's going to be perfect. There we go. And I need, oops. I need 24 of those, so I need 12 squares, which this is really thick. 1, 2, 3. Oh no. Okay, we're gonna have some trouble there. One, two, three. Now what we're going to do, without picking that up, is we're just going to cut across the triangle. Okay, let's see if it works. Let's see, this is it's perfect. Perfect. Thank goodness. Now I need 24 of these. Now I know I have some issues in here. 13. Here's our first issue. This piece right here that wasn't lined up good. Not as many issues as I expected. So let's go ahead and cut this again. 1, 2, 3. Let's check that. Perfect. And we're going to turn this. And we're going to cut right across it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here's our issue. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Oh. I only need 2 of these, so we're definitely going to use this. All right, those are done. All right, so let's see what we still got. We haven't done the circles. We're going to wait. Diamonds, sashing strips done. Setting squares done. Petals done. Corners of stalks. Borders I'm going to wait on. All right. We are done cutting. Okay. So we are finished cutting out the pieces that we're going to do today. There is still some cutting to do. This border, I have not cut that. So that I'm going to wait on until I get closer to using that. No need to do that. I want to do what's called mitered corners. So I need those to be extra long, and I want to wait until I have a good size on my quilt top. But for now, I have all the petals cut out. I have all the green cut out, and I have all the white cut out. So we are ready to start sewing. And you're going to have to wait till the next video. Well, friends, thanks so much for hanging out with me today and helping me cut out this baby quilt. Now remember, even when you make a quilt from a pattern book, it's still going to be unique because your choices and your fabrics are going to make it extra special. And don't forget, I have a few little surprises up my sleeves to make this even more special. As always, friends, I really appreciate you watching. Thanks so much for joining me. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, hit that button. We'd love you to be a part of the Kowalski Mountain family. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.